We want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gailey has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true. I'm feeling good.
CBS Mornings.
The Department of Justice has launched an investigation into the failure of Silicon Valley Bank.
If the damage had spread across our financial system, the deposits and savings of tens of millions of families and small businesses could have been at serious risk.
We won Iowa twice, and unfortunately, we're going to have to do it a third time. Ron DeSantis, did anyone ever hear of DeSantis? The sanctimonious DeSantis.
What's going on in Florida is, as my mother would say, close to sinful.
The presidential race already heating up. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Thank you for joining us. The Department of Justice is investigating the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. Federal law enforcement officials tell CBS News the review is in its early stages. The Wall Street Journal reports that the Securities and Exchange Commission is also looking into it. Then there's the politics. House Republicans held a call last night to discuss their response. And today, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy put the blame on the Biden administration. He tweeted, quote, Biden's reckless spending caused record inflation and rapid interest rate hikes that broke family budgets and banks, too. So for more on this, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe and Scott McFarland. Scott is CBS News congressional correspondent with us from Capitol Hill, and CBS News' Ed O'Keefe is senior White House correspondent and political correspondent from California, joining us where the president is traveling today. Thank you both for being here. Scott, I want to start with you. I want to play a little bit of sound from some of the Republican lawmakers who are on some key committees dealing with this issue.
They're trying to send the message that your bank accounts are safe in America, so there's no need to move money from one bank to another based off some social media feed or some report. That's a clear message they're sending.
Calls for more regulation on regional banks and putting more pressure on regional banks with more rules and regulations is not the answer.
What is relevant is risky management practices with or without Dodd-Frank and lack of supervision by the primary regulator.
So, Scott, you've been on Capitol Hill all day talking to lawmakers. What are the next steps? Are you seeing any calls for action on a legislative response?
A few moments ago, just heard back from the House Majority Leader's office, who says there are no plans to bring Congress back, the U.S. House back any sooner to tackle these bank failures and any legislation that may be needed because of these bank failures. So there's no urgency in that sense. And we've been kind of feeling around in the dark for any indication, any light that shows a possible bipartisan legislative effort in the works, and we are finding nothing right now. This is happening at a politically toxic moment. There is no indication of a meeting of the minds between the two parties as to a road ahead. But here are the proposals we're hearing from any number of Democrats: raising the insurance level through which the FDIC can insure losses in the case of a bank failure. Republicans talking about possible changes to regulations, but not a rollback of those 2018 changes that many Democrats blame these failures on. But we can be certain of one thing: there will be hearings on both sides of the U.S. Capitol. Democrats in the Senate are going to call for it. Republicans in the House are going to call for it. There will be robust investigations, but there's no trajectory towards a legislative change because of this.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be very interested in who they bring in front of them for those hearings. I mean, Ed, to you've heard Republicans are trying to pin this on the White House. What is the White House saying in response to this argument that they're making? And is there any indication of any further steps the administration could take, or are they calling on action from Congress?
They're mostly leaving this to the Treasury Department and the related bank regulators to ensure that there aren't any more banks like SVB and Signature Bank out there, and hoping that they can catch this before it happens again. Remember, also, FDIC is trying to auction off parts of SVB to other private companies to see if they're interested in buying up the leftover pieces. That would be one way to make this go away. The hope is that this was contained to just these two smaller regional banks and not part of a wider collapse of the regional or smaller banking sector. And as it comes to legislation, they're probably going to leave that, for now at least, to Democrats and Republicans to squabble over. If they can't sort out any other issue, should we believe that this is one that they can suddenly sort out? So we'll see. There's no immediate call for some kind of legislative fix from the White House just yet, but we know the president was expressing concern over the weekend that the banks themselves or their investors would somehow get relief in this situation. And you saw him lay out when he spoke about this Monday that it's really just the customers, the depositors, that he's concerned about helping, that if something else happened to the investors and those in charge of these failed banks, well, that's just capitalism running its course. So we'll see. But certainly, this is a White House that has been concerned about, sensitive to the health of the economy and anything that gets in the way of that. Inflation easing today with the consumer price index coming about 6% is something they're encouraged by. And, we'll see again in the coming days whether there's any other bank out there that could potentially be affected in this way. And if not, this may mostly become an academic exercise up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, speaking of that squabbling, that political squabbling that Ed was talking about, I mean, it was interesting that you're not really hearing Republicans object to the actions taken by the administration and Treasury. So kind of walk us through the politics here. How are they advancing their respective arguments?
We've heard some criticism of the Federal Reserve in California, perhaps steps it could have taken to ward off the failure at Silicon Valley. Let's put that aside. What's jumping out at me over the past 24 hours is the number of members of Congress from both parties who are issuing these statements, trying to reassure their own constituents that it is safe to put their money in a community bank, that the banking system as a whole is safe, almost serving like a cheerleader or a morale coach for the country at this moment in time, especially those who represent more rural areas where there are more smaller community banks. Joe Manchin did this in West Virginia. Barry Loudermilk, the Republican, did this in Georgia. Let's put that aside for a moment also. There's this hope, if not this aspiration, Caitlin, that this will not bear any resemblance to 2008 and the economic calamity and the bank calamity of 2008. Maybe that's a hope, maybe that's an aspiration, but we can say one thing without equivocation. There are only a few dozen members of Congress who were still here from 2008. There aren't hundreds. There are just dozens. There's been such turnover in Congress in the wave elections of 2010, 2018. And that leaves a little less experience with this type of issue than Congress might have had if it happened 5 or 10 years ago. So some members of Congress will be learning on the fly how Congress is supposed to respond to a massive bank failure.
Yeah, that's a really good point about a lot of constituents, no matter what party you belong to, are concerned about their own personal finances and what this means for them. And I want to switch gears a little bit and go to where you are in California, because that's where the president is. He just spoke or is currently speaking in Monterey Park, and he announced a new executive order on guns. What exactly does that entail?
Yeah, he's here in Monterey Park, where, of course, there was a shooting in January at this ballroom behind us, now shuttered ballroom. Remember, 11 people were killed, 9 injured in those shootings just off of Lunar New Year celebrations in this predominantly Asian community. The president here today, as he signs an executive order that is designed to ensure that elements of the legislation passed last summer in bipartisan fashion regarding gun restrictions is actually enacted, telling the Justice Department, work to ensure that every background check that has to happen before a gun sale can actually happen, and trying to close loopholes and sort of better define what exactly is now considered a gun purchase. There are those that are done at licensed firearm dealerships. There are those that are done at gun shows. But what about the guy who maybe is selling one off, an antique or a hobby weapon to somebody? Ensuring that those purchases are also subject to a background check as subject to the law that was passed last year. And then also encouraging the entire federal government, in essence, from the Pentagon to the VA, the Department of Health and Human Services and Homeland Security, to do what it can, the various ways it talks to the public, raising concerns about safe storage of firearms, about the potential theft of them while they're being shipped, and also encouraging a better understanding of red flag laws that are in about 19 states in the District of Columbia, those laws that allow somebody to go to a judge and say, I believe this person may be a threat to themselves. We need to make sure that they don't have access to a firearm, at least temporarily, so that they don't harm themselves or others. Of course, he's doing this in a state that has some of the strictest gun laws already. And after a situation where a background check wouldn't have necessarily made things any easier because the man who's alleged to have done this shooting had owned the weapon since the late 1990s. So it wasn't an example of somebody perhaps getting one illegally and then going and using it in a violent way. We should also point out, Caitlin, I've been stunned by this stat all day long, and I want to share it again here. What are we at now? About 117 mass shootings, 110 mass shootings so far this year, 77 of them since this shooting here in January.
Wow, Ed, and unfortunately not the first time the president has had to visit the site of a mass shooting in his term so far. Ed O'Keefe and Scott McFarlane, as always, thank you so much for your reporting. And Biden has yet to announce if he's running again in 2024. But even before he does, donors are already laying the groundwork. Coming up, the outgoing head of the Democrats' top super PAC on what donors want and who they'd like to see on the ticket. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're gonna tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
And welcome back to Red and Blue. While Republicans are gearing up for what could be a crowded primary field in 2024, Democrats are waiting to see whether Biden announces whether he's running again. For more on 2024, Guy Cecil joins us now. He's the outgoing chairman and chief strategist for Priorities USA, one of the Democrats' most powerful super PACs, and helped raise more than $650 million for the party. Good to see you here in
Thanks
person.
For having me.
Thanks for joining us. So let's talk about 2024. Are Democrats expecting to run against Trump again? What does the field look like to you?
Well, I think the field is obviously evolving, and we're either going to run against Trump or a carbon copy of Trump, because I think overall the Republican Party has moved farther and farther and farther to the right. And we've seen even in the last 24 hours with some of their answers around Ukraine that the only way to win a Republican Party nomination is to try to out-Trump the original Trump. And whether it's him or somebody else, I think Biden and Harris will be prepared.
So speaking of that ticket, Biden and Harris 2024, no question about it.
Well, the president has said he intends to run. The first lady has said she expects him to run. And so I'm going to take their word for it. And I think Democrats are prepared to support the Biden-Harris ticket and are lining up behind him already.
Do you sense any sort of opportunity for a primary challenge? Do you think there should be one?
I really don't. I don't think there's going to be a particularly credible candidate that decides to run. And I think we've already seen that most of the Democratic Party, the Democratic National Committee members, elected officials, grassroots activists are expecting and are, in fact, lining up behind Biden. So while there may be a candidate or two to get into the race, I seriously doubt that they'll be competitive.
And you talk to donors all the time. We have seen reporting that, there has been a lot of criticism of Vice President Kamala Harris. Are you hearing that from the donor community? Is there any sense of wanting the ticket to change at all?
One of the things that I remind our donors and any Democrat I come across is that anxiety is the love language of every Democrat. And every cycle, there's something that we pretend to be worried about or we try to focus on. The reality is that the vice president has done an outstanding job. She was an asset to the ticket. She's been an asset to this administration. The president has made it clear that he's an asset to his decision-making process. She's going to be on the ticket. And the folks that I talk to are supporting a Biden-Harris ticket, and they're supporting Kamala Harris being on the ticket. So you can always find one or two naysayers in the Democratic Party. We're a big, occasionally unwieldy group. But the large majority of our party is supporting Vice President Harris.
You used to also lead the DSCC, the Senate campaign arm. The map looks pretty difficult for Democrats next time around. Are you confident that Democrats can keep control of the Senate after 2024?
The one thing I think that's encouraging is we just got through a pretty difficult map, where at the beginning of the cycle, most people were predicting that Republicans had a great chance of winning the majority. And in fact, we not only held the majority, we actually gained a seat to 51. And so there's no question that we're going to have races in places like Montana and Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, that'll be competitive races. But when you look at John Tester, when you look at somebody like Sherrod Brown, there are very few elected officials that fit their state the way that John Tester and Sherrod Brown do. And so I'm confident in those races, and I think we have an excellent shot of holding our majority.
Another one of those candidates would be Joe Manchin, who is running for re-election in West Virginia. Do you anticipate that he'll run as a Democrat, or do you think that he'll switch and align with run as an independent?
I think the most likely scenario is that he'll run as a Democrat. The senator has been a Democrat his entire life. He served as a Democratic governor in West Virginia, but that's obviously his decision to make. I think the most important thing is that our party be a big tent party, and that we understand that a senator from West Virginia is going to be a little bit different than a senator from California or from New York, and that the way we build a majority, a governing majority, is making sure that Democrats are there for Joe Manchin, even when I disagree with Joe Manchin on quite a few things. But I recognize that the Senate majority is really critical to our success and to passing a Biden agenda. And we should be supporting it.
So no other Democrat could really have a chance in West Virginia like Manchin does?
I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that Joe Manchin is the only competitive Democrat that can run in West Virginia.
What about Arizona? Because we've seen Kyrsten Sinema change her registration to an independent. Ruben Gallego is running as the Democrat. Should Democrats back him? Should they stick with Sinema, who's still caucusing with the Democrats, and she's, the incumbent? How would you approach that?
Well, I think first things first, the senator has to announce officially that she's running. I know she's raising money, but in my experience as head of the DSCC, you're always running until you're not. And so I think the contours of that race are going to shape up. But I expect, in large part, that most Democratic donors, most Democratic elected officials will end up supporting the Democratic nominee. And I expect that to be Congressman Gallego, and I think he's going to ultimately win that election.
And just really quickly, Democrats' biggest challenge heading into 2024?
I think it's just staying focused. Like I said before, Democrats, we love to eat our own. We are an anxious bunch. But the reality is that we have some real opportunities. One, we have an opportunity to govern. And I think when we've seen the president's actions over the last couple of days in regards to the banks, the way that he has responded in Ohio to crisis, our president is tested, and he's not distracted by the outside chatter. And I think as long as we stay focused on that, and we continue to respond to what the Republicans are doing. You notice no Republicans are putting forward an agenda. They won't put forward a budget. They won't put forward a response to East Palestine. They won't put forward a real response to the economic crises that our country faces. They're focused on attacks and on who can be the most right-wing, who can be the hardest ideologue in their party. And I think that contrast between Democrats and Republicans is going to shape up pretty well going into next November.
Already heating up. Guy Cecil, good to see you.
Thank you.
Hope you'll join us again throughout all of this. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis hasn't officially declared his bid for the White House, but that's not stopping Donald Trump from attacking him last night in Iowa. How this new Republican rivalry will shape next year's race, you're streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why don't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony Dvoldar from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Ron DeSantis, did anyone ever hear of DeSantis? The sanctimonious DeSantis. No, Ron DeSantis strongly opposed ethanol. He was very, very bad on ethanol. He fought it all the way, and he also fought against Social Security. He wanted to decimate it and voted against it 3 times. Voted against Social Security. That's a bad one. A lot of people don't know that.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. That was former President Trump going after Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor. So far has steered clear of responding, but he did spark some controversy over his views on Ukraine. In a questionnaire from Fox News, DeSantis said, quote, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. Meanwhile, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is taking a different approach, saying, quote, along with our allies in Europe and elsewhere, we should provide conventional weapons that enable Ukraine to effectively stop the Russian invasion and occupation of its land. So joining us now for more on all of this is CBS News political director Finn Gomez, who is fresh off the plane with the former president from Iowa. Good to see you. Thanks for jumping on set with us. Let's talk about Ukraine really quickly because DeSantis is aligning himself essentially with Donald Trump here. It seems like there's some fault lines within the Republican Party on this issue.
Yeah, I think you can see that. There's different lanes here when it comes to foreign policy, and specifically Ukraine. And with DeSantis saying that he's doesn't want to be entangled in this, quote, territorial dispute, it does sound a lot like Donald Trump. And you know what, CHP, when I was at CPAC, and I was also, in Davenport with Trump yesterday. And when he spoke specifically about this issue, it is definitely a crowd favorite. And I think what they're both trying to cater to and appeal to is that base voter. And many of them, agree with that position.
Interesting. And it's such in contrast with what we're seeing from Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Right, exactly.
So we'll see kind of if that matches the sentiment in the country. So you just got off the plane you were traveling with former President Trump as he went to Iowa. You talked to him, you asked him questions.
Sure.
He was talking a lot about Ron DeSantis. It seems like the Florida governor is on his mind. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, no, I think that was one of the key headlines, I think, out of this journey from West Palm Beach to Davenport and back. He spoke to press on the plane. There was a handful of us. CBS News was the only network on the plane. And I got a chance to ask him several questions. But I think one of the questions I asked him was about DeSantis, because he did spend a lot of time engaging, countering him, going after the Florida governor, who has not yet entered the race, of course, but is inching towards nearing that decision. And I think that what you're seeing the CNN poll that came out earlier, that it is really right now between those two names. And I think Trump does see him as his real competition. And you could see that, the biggest indicator being he's spending so much time focused on him, targeting his attacks on him.
Yeah, and they were both in Davenport within days of each other, right?
Yeah, 3 days apart. I mean, and one of the biggest hits at CHP actually that when we were discussing was that he said that, when he was talking about specifically about Ukraine, but, he said that it was a flip-flop. Trump said it was a flip-flop on, DeSantis said a flip-flop on his positioning on Ukraine, and that he was following me, and you heard a lot of that.
Yeah, it will be so interesting to see how that intensifies. Another rival for the president is the former president is his former vice president, Mike Pence. He had something to say about him too, right? What was his reaction to Pence? He had some tough comments for him over the weekend.
Yeah, at Gridiron on Saturday, of course, his former vice president said that had made some news, said that Trump had endangered his family and those on Capitol Hill on January 6th with his reckless words, and then said that history would hold them accountable. I asked former President Trump about that specifically, and he said that Pence had turned from this nice guy to now that he's running into a different guy, essentially, because he's polling at 3 points, what Trump had said. But more importantly, he said that he said specifically that had he sent the votes back to the legislatures talking about the actions on January 6th, they wouldn't have had a problem with January 6th. So in many ways, you can blame him, Pence, for January 6th, which is not true. But at the same time, he hit back against his ticket mate, his vice president that they were leading the administration for the last for over 4 years.
Yeah, and ran twice together. I think that's such a good point, because I know we've been talking about this rivalry between them, how there's no love lost anymore. But it's just so striking that here you have a former president and his former vice president in this kind of combat with each other and
Right.
could be running against each other.
Right, exactly.
Next year.
I mean, Pence is still not declared, but again, he's also nearing one. But can you just imagine that debate stage?
Yeah,
Those
absolutely.
two going after each other?
Going to be heated. I know you'll
Right.
be there for all of it. Thanks for hopping off the plane and joining us here on set. Good to
Thanks,
see you,
CHP.
Finn. Thanks for your reporting.
Yeah.
And that does it for us today on Red and Blue. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match